Hi, welcome. It's Frederick Elderman here from Turbocharger Practice, and welcome to another expert interview. Today we're lucky enough to have Alex Jamieson online from AJ Financial Planning. He's the founder of that organisation. And Alex writes for most of the major financial magazines in Australia. He consults to a lot of different businesses, including veterinary, and he has clients all over the world, Australia, UK, Brazil. Hi, Alex. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi, Frederick. How are you going?
I'm great. Thank you very much. Look, what we talked about before, Alex, is a topic for today, and one of the things that always concerns me as a business, coach and mentor is that I see so many practitioners and people in practices working so hard to put money aside for their future or for security or whatever, and they work really hard at that, and typically they do it and they achieve it, but what they fail to look is the other side of the coin, and they fail to protect those assets, and they can be taken away through all sorts of injury, accidents, bad luck, etc. So we thought we'd talk about that today. Is that okay with you, Alex?
Yeah, absolutely, not a problem at all.
Have you got any sort of introductory words to say about that, aside from what I said?
Look, I think there's a quite a famous entrepreneur. He basically was the founder of a company that we all know called PayPal. He's gone on and basically created an automotive business in electronic cars, as well as literally building rockets to ship goods and services and people into space. And his name's Elon Musk. And he's been interviewed a number of times, and basically he made a really interesting comment, which is basically around, a normal behaviour of an entrepreneur is always to look forward, always looking forward to, always looking for the opportunity, how I'll grow my business and those types of things. So we spend huge amounts of time and mindset thinking about those areas. What we probably don't think about is some of the risks, and really evaluating the risks, and I guess in part, really looking at them carefully and evaluating the opportunities that go with them. So, I sort of bounce around some of these ideas, when we hear for a brand spanking new business, someone that's just about to get out the doors, say opening a vet practice, all those types of things, and you look at some of the numbers that are out there floating around in the industry, broadly outside vets particularly, but in the general marketplace, so is that in the first 18 months, 80% of businesses fail and 20% survive. That's an enormous figure. And then when we go and have a look at, say, the ASIC registries with the administration companies that have been running for a long period of time, and the administrators that sort of step into these organisations and wind them up and close them down, they too have to do reports, and they file them with ASIC. So we spend a lot of time looking at all the amazing things you can do. Sometimes it's also reflective to look at some of the reasons businesses haven't done well, and equally making sure that, in a lot of regards, that you don't sort of fall into those types of traps. So, for example, the ASIC report, for example, largely the administrators found there were three main areas that resulted for. One was sort of what they call poor financial controls. The other one was strategy management, not having a key strategy management sort of plan or strategic planning in place, and then the last one was cash flow planning. So, in business and in your personal life as well, largely it's quantifying those risks as well as those exciting opportunities to really sort of juice it up and get you going when you're sort of making some of those decision makings around your personal affairs.
Yeah, cool. Thank you for that. Those general numbers you said, that 80-20, failure rate, and that typically doesn't apply to vet, as you know, but, the problem in vet is that our profitability is so poor. Over the last 10 years, the average profitability, worldwide is, 7, 8, 9%. So when you eke out that meagre living, you really need to make sure it's correctly protected, whether an employee or whether you're a practice owner, because it's hard to come by and you don't want to lose it.
absolutely. And look, I think part of it, we're seeing, well, there's two folds with that. We're seeing some enormous evolution in technology. So, from a financial management perspective, gone were the days where you used to sort of put your books into your bookkeeper. They would do your monthly bookkeeping. You might get the reports generated back to you maybe a month after that. So you're looking at financials that are probably 3 months out of date, and really now you're trying to make decisions around your vet practice, how you're going, literally driving flat out, looking at your rearview mirrors. Now with things like new bookkeeping softwares like Xero, where it's becoming real life, we're actually putting a lot of the business owners right into the box seat. The other thing as well, though, is when you sort of look at your affairs, we sort of look at them from a quadrant perspective. You've got your personal line, and then there's a whole long line of things or areas that you need to focus on there. And then, as you said, Dick, with your business side of things too, you've got a whole long list of things that really need to be contemplated. And sometimes, the way that the business owners are in their day-to-day businesses, a lot of time doesn't really get spent on these sort of things, so they sort of get pushed under the carpet. The issue is to some degree, I had this morning one of our guys in our office come in, and yesterday he was driving his car. He got sideswiped, the car's completely written off. Fortunately, he's all right. I was chatting to the police officer, and he said, gosh, if you weren't driving a Mercedes, he had a Mercedes-Benz, if you weren't driving a Mercedes, you'd be dead now. And your passengers would be as well. And so the only thing that saved this guy's life is just because he made a choice around the type of vehicle. For him, he drove. If he was driving something smaller, he wouldn't be with us, unfortunately, anymore. And so I'm not saying go out and rush and buy a Mercedes or anything, but I'm saying just the general analysis of wearing a seatbelt. Everyone wears it every day. You don't really consider about some of the risks. Some of these underlying risks that seem possibly bubbling around on the surface. You always think, oh, it won't happen to me. Unfortunately, like a car accident is, unfortunately it does from time to time pop up through someone's working career.
Thank you. I've got some questions that I've written down, so let me just ask them if I could. So what is the business and the personal sort of financial arsenal all about?
Yeah, I think it's really, as I sort of mentioned before, it's really looking at the overall position of an organisation, and I guess some of the challenges that sort of go with it as well from a business. As I mentioned, just sort of in the opening sort of statements, to some degree, we do spend a huge, enormous amount of time really looking at what we call our attack game. So, we've got the Australian Open going on in Melbourne at the moment, and with tennis, you've got your two games, your attack and your defence play. And really, I'd say most of the focus for a business owner is all around attack game. What we're looking at is the defence game with the arsenal, which is really, really considering a lot of the risks that might be in your business or in your personal life as well, and saying, hey, look, these defence games need to be brushed up so that, they're in places like the seatbelt, they're in a place ready to go so that you're not scrounging around saying, I'm in an accident, I now need to know where my seatbelt is, it's already locked in and loaded, and if something should happen, you're already, protected from that standpoint. So effectively, really, we sort of keep them, the easy division is between, there's quadrants within your personal life and there's also quadrants within the business life, and then below there you sort of really delve deeper.
So a question, and I can see how that applies to business owners, and that's really they've got all the business stuff happening, but there'll be employed vets that are watching this, listening to this, that are going to say things like, well, I'm an employed vet, I get a wage, I've got workers' compensation, da-da-da-da. I don't need to protect myself in any way, shape or form. True? Not true?
Definitely not true. If anything, the risks to your personal side can be, we fragment them into a range of different areas. So, for example, okay, let's take the vet that's an employee from that standpoint. Okay, on the family front, they may have a partner, they may have kids. So for them, things around estate planning issues, I was literally just chatting to somebody yesterday who had, a classic sort of traditional marriage with the wife and a couple of kids, and basically they've got a loan and all the rest. And I sort of said, well, what might happen if the missus isn't there and you're not there to look after the kids? And so we find very regularly, a lot of cases, where we talk about responsibility with kids and all the rest and all the things that God would bring to bring them up. What happens if you're not there? And so areas around estate planning are fairly important. Things around as well, the pressures with life today and lifestyle and what that does to people's cash flow and debt. Those types of things can really have a big impact. One of the main primary reasons for divorce, not the only, but one of the big reasons for divorce is financial pressures that completely destroy a relationship. And so, the banks are always happy to hand it up and to hand the money out until a certain point, identifying well before where that point might be to give that quality of life and versus what you're trying to achieve for your financial future as well is equally important. So certainly managing those areas of one's life can be just as important as some of the others.
A minute ago you mentioned, you used the word quadrants. Can you sort of explain what you mean by those and maybe talk about them in a little bit more detail?
Yeah, I think really, you sort of got to some degree, we sort of think of them as, if I look at someone like a business owner, for example, you've got your personal side and then you've got your business side. And for a person that's an employee, that business side just literally becomes your career. And so really, if we sort of step into the granular level of what each one of these components are, really from a structural perspective, some of the areas I sort of touched on some for the personal side, but some of the other areas for the personal side of things are, okay, for example, whose name do you own the bulk of the wealth for the family? So, a lot of people sort of think, well, I'm an employer, may not have any risk. Well, that's you in a microsecond right now. That's not you tomorrow or the next day or in 5 or 10 or 15 years' time. That situation might change. And so if we're going gun blazing for the employees side of it, building wealth, doing all these things, and if you're owning assets in your name and decide one day you want to be self-employed, there can be some huge flow-on tax implications, asset protection implications, and those types of things that really flow from that direction. So being really clear around, and clarity may not be there, but being really clear about structuring of assets, housing of assets, tax planning around those types of things, it could be really quite important too. And as well, things like estate planning. And really the glue that where there's funding shortfalls, you can look at things like, I spoke about the car before, if he had the first question to him afterwards checking it was okay is, did you have comprehensive insurance? And those areas can be expanded right through to the kids know, having spoken to mum and dad, so if the kids are left there, we've got clients that are literally in that experience at the moment, and the kids are fortunate where they have insurance policies to sort of provide the wealth to fund their remaining dependent lives. On the business front, though, certainly, again, it's looking really at, again, the problem with business is it follows this S-curve. So you sort of go through a business to some degree, it sort of gets going, and then really they start to take off, hopefully with good input from people like you did. The issues, though, that come from it is things that apply for a business down here versus what they are when they're up here are totally different. Entity utilisation, technicalities around asset protection, the things that they're facing at this level versus this level is completely different. The problem is that middle section can be really fast. And so part of the problems with it as well is when they're looking at some of these changes, as well as when do we actually pull the lever, when do we actually pull the lever to move and change and implement some of these new things into our business as well. But certainly from a business side of things, if they've got, partners in the business, simple things like, how do we value this thing if we have a nice start? It's hard enough sometimes having a marriage with your spouse. The business relationship is the same type of thing. It's really a marriage for business owners, and how do we value this thing if you're not here, and all those things sometimes go with it too.
So I guess maybe two summaries from me. Number one, an employed veterinarian needs to look at asset protection, structuring, etc., even though they think so. Financial planning, I guess, in general. And secondly, the business owners should really look at their business with the end in mind with respect to what they're going to achieve or want to achieve in the future.
Business probably also, I sort of see a business as a living, breathing thing. And so it's, I treat it very much like a person in some regards. What's going to happen to that person if you're not there? How is that going to start talking to your estate and the money and the things that you're trying to achieve upon death? Equally, what happens if you want to sell it? What are going to be some of those tax implications that might go to it when you finally retire? But also from an asset protection level side of things, we see unfortunately fairly regularly for people that are sort of starting out in business where the business owner might actually own the business themselves in their own name. The shares of the company are in the business owner's name. And so you see from a structuring perspective as well, who actually owns this wealth and following it through that chain of ownership to see where it actually comes back. On the flip side as well, the biggest reasons businesses sort of really struggle and eventually fail comes around financial management and strategic planning as well. So, from particularly with a lot of the businesses like the vets that are fairly quite lean in operations as well, from a profitability perspective, that financial planning is, not in my occupation sense in terms of looking at the numbers of the business and doing those more boring things like setting budgets and targets and what you're trying to achieve is even more critical, particularly with marginal businesses, to really try and improve the profitability and utilise technology and some of the marketing initiatives that we do to really try and create more buffers within those profitability sort of areas of the business. Absolutely.
And both from a personal perspective for an employed veterinarian again, and from a business perspective from business owner, veterinary business owner, how often should they look at those sorts of things to fine-tune them or manage them or whatever?
Yes, the big thing with it is, so from a structural perspective, like your wills and looking at your overall entities and how they're interacting, so this is from those sort of levels. We sort of say every sort of 3 years you should be touching with it. And what I mean by touching it is really following the flow of how the money comes into this organisation, how it flows out, and equally who owns this asset and how it interacts with what you're trying to achieve. A lot of times, particularly if you're moving through that S-curve, those adjustments will probably need to be done through mid-cycle, may cause change of review points or those types of things. Other times, it may not require any action. The other areas around the financial planning, structuring, and those types of things, we always say that's at least an annual event. Setting those targets and objectives, particularly this time of year, this is fantastic. Start of the calendar year, or also start of the financial year, a lot of people come in fresh. from breaks and really eager to sort of get things happening. On the personal front, you know, your wills and your affairs usually, again, we'll sort of say every 3 to 5 years, probably less so, because unless you get a significant life-changing event, things that sort of trigger those things is, you know, if you have a young family and, you know, you're upgrading the house and taking on a bit more debt, or you've had a salary increase or a change in your income or expenses that change that would cause us to structurally want to go back and have another look at, you know, things like the flowing inputs, like your insurances, or how's this asset that you've just acquired, a holiday home down at the beach, how's that going to now talk in with your estate planning affairs, and who's going to own this thing, and those types of sort of quadrants we would need to explore too.
Cool. Okay, thank you. That makes sense. Another question that I wrote down is if you were developing a checklist around each of those areas that you talked about previously, what are some of the things that you'd be checking or looking at?
Yeah, I think on the business front, you know, they talk about the working capital of the business is like the lifeblood of the business, and so, you know, that for us is probably one of the areas for business owners that really, A, we want to understand, but B, from an owner's perspective, you want to be able to understand. A lot of time accountants produce reports with profit and loss and balance sheets, and a lot of business owners don't know how to read them because they're set up for tax and not for running a business. And so something that is actually getting reports in a format like that really makes sense to the business owner, so they can understand where the business at, and not, you know, 6 months in a review mirror, but really, you know, with a fairly accurate degree of accuracy. The other things are things around like ownership setup, as I mentioned. If they've got partners, things like buy-sell agreements, you know, we really want to be making sure that from a partner's perspective that area, that's really hard. Like that's getting that sort of all put together and all put in place does take a lot of energy. But certainly in that area, you don't want a business partner who's passed away and you're trying to negotiate with the spouse at probably the worst possible time to try and get a sale price to buy out his or her share, which creates huge complexity. Insurance, whether it be professional indemnity right through to how am I going to fund this now buy-sell agreement to buy out a partner if they die, to, you know, right through to just protecting their own, you know, at the end of the day they don't get annual leave, but, you know, they're sick for a long duration of time, it'll have an impact on their bed. And finally, just, you know, sitting down with, you know, the business coaches and making sure that you've got the strategic and as well as the financial sort of, and I get you sort of mentioned over the years, you've got quite a lot of matrices that you use for that, you know, around profitabilities and percentages that benchmark a lot of those types of things, so that the owners can see really clearly where they can get those areas of improvement. On the personal side of things, it sort of gets lumped into three main areas. You know, you've got your I'm no longer here, so estate planning side of things. Then you've got the other areas which are like you know, debt management, cash flow. Quite frequently, they're with family pressures. They're really important. Can put enormous strains under people's lives. And then finally, you know, the areas that just, you know, being sufficiently protected. So looking at ownership structures, even for an employee, is just as important, because you just don't know what might be around the corner next week or next year.
Okay, cool, thank you. And I guess the last question I've got is, how do you pull all this together? How do you make it sort of happen?
Yeah, I think really you sort of go back to that Elon Musk sort of idea, and it's giving. I always say you sort of need to look at your year ahead, and you need to allocate some time out of the business to work in the business and get really clear about some spots where you say that, you know, either this is for the business owners, you're stepping out of your business and you're blocking out time so you can actually give consideration to some of these areas. Obviously, this particular topic won't take all of that volume of work, but certainly when you've allocated the time, it's really important to give it. It's really then bringing in a lot of areas of expertise. So, a lot of these things, it's not a case of one person is just going to be handling this in gamut. You find your panel, and it's like, your panel of advisory, which I always sort of encourage business owners to have, people that you trust and can rely on. They're all going to need to be talking. So you've got your business coach sort of, I guess, identifying and discussing a lot of these things with you, and then really bringing the areas of expertise with the accountants, the solicitors, and obviously we get involved as well from a technical perspective. Sometimes if it's just a case of, hey, look, we don't even know where to start with this, a lot of cases we jump in just at an appointing end to at least sort of create some structure around it, and then we bring in the parts that are involved, I guess, really for getting it on track. In the personal side, it's a little bit less complicated. So from that standpoint, really, you're just looking at those three main areas that I spoke about earlier and just saying where are my deficiencies around in my own personal life. Look, I guess I sort of encourage, we sort of have the analogy when you're applying for a life insurance, for example, and you've got a husband-wife sort of situation. It's a really classic sort of setup where the husband will say, oh, we need only this amount of cover. And I always say, look, let the other person decide, because they're going to be left living with the consequences, So really, it's also having a fairly frank discussion around what it will mean if certain things happen. And if you don't have rules in place, you do have rules in place, and you don't have insurance in place.
So I think a lot of employed vets would also be simply going to a tax account, I mean a HR block type that all they do is tax returns, and so then they're not getting anything off it.
Yeah, definitely. Like to a lot of degree, your classic accountant that's simply just processing a pay slip type of situation really is a volume type business game. And so if you sort of think of their business models and what they may charge for production of those tax returns, they don't really have much time. There are possibly some out there, but they don't really have much time to really think outside, input into the machine, output out with a return, and push it on next sort of type of situation. And so when you're having these real sort of thought-provoking type of discussions, A, you need time to have them, and B, you need time to reflect on them. And sometimes it's also just having, I would say it's the things you probably don't know, the things you need to be more concerned about, and the things you do know, because you can't really evaluate the risk if you don't have any knowledge. And that tends to be when we see events occur. Unfortunately, we do see them on the flip side, which gives the reason to be more cautious. It goes back to that 80% of the businesses that fail. 80% of them that started, otherwise they would never have started in the first place. So something happens along the line, and it's really getting clear around, not so much this is just a wonderful opportunity and all goes with it, but all it equally is what might happen if something wasn't quite there.
So that's been excellent. It's really given me a whole new insight and I guess a depth of understanding into this financial planning is sort of a complex topic. Have you got any sort of summary or a couple of things you just want to, key points you want to tell anyone that's watching?
Yeah, I think the big thing is for the business owners is to really start thinking about their business as like a person, because the way you interact with that changes. So if you think of it as just a business and it's not living and breathing, your interaction with that is different. So if it starts to become a person, from that perspective you now think, well how am I going to look after this person? What happens if I'm not around? And equally, who looks after this person? Who's going to be the guardian for them? And so from that perspective, then you can start to really drill into some of those things. From an individual side of things, really at the end of the day, you're there and you're enjoying it, and there's a passion for the work that you do. But unfortunately, in a lot of medical professions, from birth right through to a whole range of them, there are events that occur that are outside your control. And so with that in mind, you don't want to be sort of looking for your parachute to jump out of the aeroplane because all hell's broken loose and you don't know where it is. And so really I always say know where the parachute is, have it availably ready to step on. If you hope you never need it. But if you do, you'll be the first one to grab it. You won't be sitting on the Titanic going, "This is my life-changing life."
I think it's a wonderful analogy on which to finish the interview. I've never thought of it like that. So, Alex Jamieson, really appreciate your time today, and I got so much out of it. I'm sure everyone else watching this as well. So, really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Cedric.